So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the evolving role of software tables in the post-COVID world as we face a new reality. I am Jonathan on behalf of the Explorer Dev community hosting this webinar sponsored by Gapstars. Let me take 2 minutes in the interest of those joining in, we'll have 2 minutes break for people to join in. We are also having some difficulty on the YouTube live. For some reason, it's not seems to be streaming for now, but we'll be checking on that shortly. We'll start off with a quick audio check. So please type in yes on the chat if you do hear me clearly. In the meanwhile, let me remind you that this webinar is brought to you as part of our Explorer Dev community meetups. We are happy to bring these uh, special meetups to ensure that we keep up to date with emerging topics and technologies as the COVID crisis continues in bringing about unprecedented change. It's important for us to keep up to date with some of the technologies going. So let me, before we start, maybe take you through some of the housekeeping important notes just to ensure that we have the best experience on the webinar for now. So by default, you're probably muted, and we'd like to keep you muted for a while just to ensure that we have no disruption. Also, that means that you can use the Q&A option on Zoom. So feel free to ask questions, because this is going to be a session where it's going to be more interactive. We want to get the audience involved as much as possible, because we're going to be mainly painting the picture of a post-COVID world. So on that note, also let me remind you that the chat box is available. We are supposed to be on YouTube Live, but we're experiencing some difficulty on the streaming. So we'll definitely look into that in the short while. In the meantime, let's go ahead on the agenda. So on the agenda for today, the idea is to have a picture on where we are heading towards. Right now, I know that a lot of things are very bleak and we're unsure of. Starting off with, we'll have a keynote by Sanjeewa, and then we will move on to a Q&A panel discussion, which is going to be a more interactive session discussing about the role, the evolving role of developers for the future. And we'll end up at 7:15 roughly. So just before we start, and maybe before I hand over to Sanjeewa, I'm going to share a poll quickly. Might see it on your screen. Do post up on the question: do you see your role within the organization expanding in the next 6 months? That's the question. That means, is there going to be more changes in the organization, in the structure where you are currently right now working with? Do you see some kind of a disruption in the normal work? So in the meantime, I'll also introduce Sanjeewa, our next speaker. Uh, Sanjeewa is a global IT leader, technology evangelist. He's probably known to most of you all, speaks at most of these meetups. Sanjay is, of course, a leader and expert in digital transformation, software engineering, IT infrastructure management. He's currently also the director at Pearson. I'd like to welcome Sanjeewa. Thanks for being here, bringing your experience in managing IT engineering teams, different dynamics, in different environments. So, really like to hand it over on this note to you, Sanjeewa.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let me share my screen.
Just quickly interrupting there, Jonathan. Can we get
Sure.
the YouTube link live as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'll be working on that to get that up soon.
So thank you for being here today, everyone. I think it's a tremendous opportunity to virtually have a host a webinar. And thank you very much for Gapstar for organizing this event. So today I will be discussing about the evolving role of a modern developer, especially during the post COVID-19 situation. So I have listed a couple of contact details. If you further wants to build the conversation, please do reach out to me. I have my Facebook, LinkedIn details I have listed here. So I think without taking a lot of time, let's move on to the kind of meat of the presentation. I'm speaking at a very high level, covering very high level areas today, and then we are probably want to open up the flow for everybody to ask the questions and build the conversation rather delivering a one-sided talk. I think that will be the best for us to during this situation. So I saw a interesting social media question in some of the sites. The question was, who led the digital transformation of your company? The answer was tricky. Actually, answer had a couple of answers they were given, like to pick the correct answer. So out of those answers, if you see the CTO or the CEO or the chief digital officer, I think most of us can say now, most of the companies' digital transformation has been driven through this COVID-19 situation. So for the IT companies, it is kind of norm to transform and work the digital products. But if you look at the larger scale of global companies, the digital transformation was lagging behind. In US itself, they have spent about 1.3 billion US dollars on digital transformation, but the 900 million dollars were out of them was like on waste because the digital transformation failed in many companies. Now I think things have changed. Now everybody has been forced to work from home. Instead of using the traditional documents, everybody was forced to use the digital documentation. Everybody was forced to use the digital financial transactions. So things have changed now. So which creates an opportunity for developers to contribute and evolve in this situation. So this tragic situation has impacted for all of us. But if you look at the history, human history, every time teams have come out of it with a greater innovations. So I think this COVID-19 situation will force us to come out of it with greater innovations. And I think the future, the economic transformation will happen from the developers. Developers and information technologists will change the future, and they will be the future soldiers of the world. I think that is where we are transforming towards with this. So let's understand very quickly what would be the post COVID-19 world. I think people will move towards some sort of a nationalist model with the globalization has its own merits and its own issues, but still the world will be globally connected through digital medium. But the rest of the world actually will be connected. Rest of the world will be focused more on their national economies. And I think the fourth industrial revolution was started like few years back, but it was not really fruitful. The artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics technologies have not actually realized in day-to-day world. But with this transformation, this will speed up. The in fourth industrial revolution will be a key component in this post-COVID world. And apart from that, most important thing would be the uprising of digital platforms. For a socialist, they can call this as like kind of a different way of implementing socialism. But for a capitalist, they will see it as a different way. But I think the digital platforms will create the environment which the consumer and producer will bring into the same location. Now, there were digital platforms. Now, for example, the traditional video renting business has been changed by the Netflix using their products. And the taxi service has been changed by Uber. So there are things like that. The digital platforms have emerged, but those digital platforms have not been thoroughly used across the globe. Now we will see a situation where whatever your age, whether you are like someone who's not close to the technology, someone who has not used the technology, or whether you are a teenager who is very savvy in the technology, whoever you are, you will be forced to work on these digital platforms. Now in Sri Lanka itself, the e-commerce industry has flourished. People have started using the digital platforms to get the products, get the goods to their homes. Even though there are issues that we are facing with it, in the post-COVID-19 world, companies will focus more and more in strengthening their digital platforms and creating them in a scalable in creating platforms that can scale up to millions of users across the globe. So I think that is some sort of a important point to look at in the post-COVID world. And also the home-centric culture will come up again. People will start using even the entertainment media from the homes. It can be games, or it can be virtual musical shows. It can be virtual entertainment mediums. All of these will be provided through digital platforms. So the backbone of this is something where a developer can come and influence. And also I think the technology democratization will happen. I will explain that a little bit further in the next slides as well, because I'm trying to cover the strategic technology trends that we can see in future. So I'm covering at a high level here. Probably in our questions, we can go into the deeper technical things. So if you have seen, the biggest issue that we face currently was to distribute the goods to the houses in Sri Lanka. So many other companies, many other countries had the same issue, where they couldn't distribute goods and services across the neighborhood because there wasn't enough people to handle that. So I think this problem will be something that will be addressed in this post-COVID situation. People and the companies will invest more money in replacing some of the blue-collar workers' work, to be honest. And some of the repetitive things will be automated. Even packaging, distributing goods and services, for example, groceries, through technologies like using drones. So those technologies will come into play. So if, as technologists, if we build a mechanism to do these things at a cheaper cost, we will be at an advantage. So that is something where I think the globe is moving forward, and it'll be very faster in the post-COVID world. People will invest a lot of money in the companies who creates the solutions using robotics as well as robotic process automation. Some of the back-end services that we do today, the manual repetitive work using documentation in companies, those things will be automated. So there are a lot of opportunities for the entrepreneurs or people who are looking for new business ideas to see these processes and then automate them and provide the solutions. So the robotic process automation will be a big contributor or a big technology that we can see in coming years. And also, when it comes to the digital monetary platforms, I think the cryptocurrency will have its own roadmap. But more than that, the banks will force to be digitalized. Usually, we never used to see the bankers working from home. It is kind of against all these such sort of rules. But I think that is change, and that will change. Even in US, we see a lot of bankers now start working from home. So the digital monetary platforms will come into play, and the banks will be digitalized. So that is something where a lot of investments will come in future to face this challenge and make these financial transactions in more digital manner. So I think as developers, that is something where we can focus on and building a better ways of uh, enabling the financial transactions. So I think those are like key technology trends which I want to talk about. And without a lot of time, I will explain a little bit on the artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, the uprising of artificial intelligence will be strengthened again and again, especially in the medical sector. Now, even personally, I was not comfortable of meeting somebody online and getting the treatments from a doctor through online mediums. But I think this will change. People are forced to use the digital medical services. Some of the hospitals will have a digital arm, like the front end of hospitals will have a digital arm. And there are ways that people are investigating and investing right now to come up with like a automatic robots, robo beds. For example, if you are sick, you just have to lay in that automatic bed, which can be at your home. The beds can be at your home, and all the required components for that bed will be connected, and it will be controlled by a doctor in somewhere else in the world. So whether your pulse rates or whether the medicine you need to give, everything will be automatically handled if you are at a bed. So this is something where people are thinking right now in a chaotic situation where you don't have enough beds at hospitals. So why not have a digitally empowered hospital bed at home, which will automatically handle the entire thing from end to end, giving medicine to controlling the oxygen rate and controlling everything. So those type of technologies will have a bigger impact. And for example, if we had the artificial intelligence technologies developed rapidly, I think the identification of these viruses would have been much easier. So those are like the digital technology trends at high level I want to touch base. So very quickly, I'll go to core skills for developers. I don't have a whole list of things. I think one of the important skill would be the technologies that are required to enable fourth industrial revolution. So based on your preference, based on your current working domain, you can pick those technologies, whether it can be artificial intelligence, whether it can be data science, whether it can be machine learning or blockchain or chatbots, so whatever these for technologies that are required to enable fourth industrial revolution will have an importance in future. And also another important factor is the time to market. So most of our developers tend to miss this delivery, the speediness of the delivery. So as soon as we can deliver things to the market, we will be fruitful. Now, for example, there are a lot of situations that we face currently, even in Sri Lanka, to distribute goods and services. But let's imagine if we had a platform where buyers can come and declare their requirement. Like, for example, they want 100 kilos of rice, and likewise, they can declare their requirement, the buyers, and the sellers can provide what they have, and then we can create a digital platform that creates a platform to meet in between. So these type of technologies, imagine if we had it today, we wouldn't spend a lot of time in Facebook or any other social media groups to find out the buyers. So, but did we had the enough development power to bring such a product quickly to the market? We didn't had. So I think that is something we need to focus on. This can be enabled through the distributed architecture. Now, if we have developed the cloud-based microservices, these things would have been easier. So microservices is something where we will have to focus a lot in this post-COVID world. And also, most importantly, the business savviness. And also the front-end technologies, I think, because the technologies that we're going to offer will be used by the everybody, whether you are 80-year-old, whether you are a teenager, whoever you are, what color you are, what race you are, you will use these common digital platforms. So then these platforms should be easily accessible for all of you. So the front-end technologies as well as the customers' requirements have to be understood. I think this is like at high level I wanted to cover on the core skills side. Without taking a lot of time, let's go into the next session where we will have to identify at the detail level what sort of technologies that should do, what sort of skills we should develop as developers. So let's go into that in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjeewa, for that. Let me quickly remind our participants if there is any question to post it on the chat box. Also, I'm sharing the polls results. So you see that most are yes or unsure. So that means there's some kind of a disruption, but without any further, and on this note, let me start off in inviting our panel for this evening. So let me quickly share the screen. So unfortunately, we are experiencing some technical difficulties on the YouTube live. We'll try to get that as possible, but I just want to remind everyone that this webinar will also be on video shortly after it. So in case you missed it for this, we'll definitely be posting it on our YouTube channel after the webinar. So it will also remind you that there's lots of questions that we'd like to ask from the audience as well as receive from the audience. So to make it as much as interactive as possible, so please do share your thoughts. So without any further ado, let me invite our panel so joining in the panel is Bani Chandrasena, also needs no introduction. She's the head of inclusive diversity at London Stock Exchange Group. So really happy to have you, Bani, in as well. And also joining is Hugo Hemmen, co-founder and CEO of Gapstars, who also brings in experience in working with Dutch startups and scale-ups. So really have a diversity panel here to discuss what a post-COVID world holds for developers. So without any further ado, let me quickly get into our first question and maybe post this to Bani. Welcome to the edge of uncertainty. Never has it been, this harder to predict, how our working futures are going to hold and what will emerge in the post-COVID world, which is now seems to be going to be the next normal. Do you believe? Let me ask this question very straightforwardly on the start. Do you believe we are going into a jobs revolution? What they call is where job descriptions are going to change, skills, everything that's going to revamp, structures, organizations are going to look at different other skills from developers. Maybe I'll ask you on this.
Okay, that's a big question. Well, the what we're experiencing right now, and I think nobody can quite predict where it's going to land. But yes, I do believe job skills are going to evolve. We're experiencing it right now when we are full-time working at home. And some of these options like working from home are things that we've been working towards over the last couple of years, but it's very different to where we are right now, where we have no choice. So yes, I think skills are going to be different. I think some of the skills we've all been working towards, but I think the ramp up just became a lot more urgent, a lot more critical. And I think people who are open-minded and ready to evolve, who can adapt, I think have a major advantage.
Thanks, Bani. Just on that, I'm going to come back to this. Let me ask Sanjeewa, you touched on combinations of machine learning, artificial intelligence, talking a lot about natural language processors, code generation technologies, whole loads, right? We're looking at, in a way that improve in such a way that, machines instead of humans. We had this discussion in the last decade probably as well, but let me ask this straight from you. Is there room for software developers as we know it in a post-COVID world, or is there going to be a drastic shift?
Yeah, I think very few people speculate that the software engineering is something will be automatically handled through the artificial intelligence technologies or something like that, where the auto code generation technologies are now there and it is improving. But I think that is not the case, because it is all about creativity. So how creative you are, maybe the repetitive things, now only even using frameworks you have some level of automation or some level of help from the code generation technologies to build a product, but still you will need to have this creativity. I think that, so as long as you are creative, as long as you are a problem solver, and as long as you look outside in the world and see a problem and try to resolve it digitally, I think there is a room for everybody to become a software engineer. So I think in the future world, the software engineers will be the developers will be the critical component who will drive every sector, whether it is health sector, financial, fintech technologies, or production lines, whatever it is. The software engineers are the one, and even like travel, like automatic cars. So in every sector, the software engineers will be the one who are problem solvers. But instead of just following something, as a developers, we all should look at a problem and then try to solve it digitally, and also try to add the creativity in different ways in solving that. With that, software engineers will have a place, and very important place in the future.
Sure, thanks, Sanjeewa. So on that note, I'm going to bring in Hugo on this. Hugo, just a week ago, we looked at remote work was more just a mere benefit. Overnight, now it's turned into a business imperative, where companies are led to, someone who's led a company that has been completely remote reliant. How do you see the future of remote software development and remote software engineers play in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jonathan, and also thanks for having me. Great to be here and to have this relevant discussion through this medium. Yeah, to get to your question, I think that I think some of the topics have already been touched by Bani and Sanjeewa. What I see from my perspective is that in the last 10 to 15 years, the role of software developers has already changed rapidly, right? I think it's one of the most dynamic fields to be in at the moment. And every time I speak with CEOs and CTOs, I basically see four major trends. I think that first of all, the need for speed, right? So everything needs to go faster. Agile was introduced, of course, and in order to create a better feedback cycle between developers and users. The need for training, right? So we see that many platforms come up and then go down, and there's sort of like this technology trend where sometimes one platform is hot and then suddenly the other platform is even better and more sexy also for developers and companies to use. So I think that constant need of training is also there. Then you have the need for software testing, right? So I think testing and coding used to be two different things. I think now when you look at a software developer that is serious about his or her job, yeah, it's not only about committing code anymore, it's also about committing tests. And I think the last trend that we see is the evolution of responsibilities. And with this, I mean that looking at how the role of developers and also the different type of developers that you kind of have nowadays has changed. I think the best example is probably DevOps, is where you basically have people that are taking a developer role and that have a really critical position within the enterprise, because they are basically own the availability and sustainability of the customer experience, right? So they are the ones keeping in check if people can order products, if people can use the product online, etc., etc. So I think, yeah, in general, when it comes to the question, I think that what is expected from them, I think really high level CEO, he wants speed, right? So he doesn't really care how. The CTO wants quality. Sometimes that is in conflict with the CEO's demand for speed. And then the CPO comes in, and he knows that there's more to it. So what he is basically working at is basically installing new agile programs, such as extreme programming, such as DevOps, in order to help him achieve business goals together with the CTO and the CEO. Right, so you really see this trend of new programs that are constantly being installed by the management in order to make their engineering departments more effective. And I think that post-COVID, these trends are just going to go much faster. And I think that the big advantage right now is that it didn't really matter if you had on-site or offshore engineering teams before, because I think it was for both teams essential to have all these types of programs, these new rules, and all these, and also these four trends to take into account. But I think right now, and I think that that's also the big opportunity that I see, and that's also why I'm really happy with these type of webinars and the audience listening in right now, is that we finally come to a moment where the big advantage for companies such as Gapstars, such as Pearson Lanka, and also Sri Lanka in general, is that the CTOs and CPOs in countries where we have a big part of our client base, such as the EU and the US, they no longer have the argument basically to say, hey, I want to build teams on premise, right? I want to have these guys sitting side by side, because I think that's important for the quality and the speed and the delivery of my software, because it's just no longer an argument, right? We're in a different phase now, we're in a different world. So I see a very bright future basically for the IT industry, and I think that if you take into account these trends as a developer and understand that, hey, this is what is needed. I need to go fast. I need to train myself. I need technologies. I need, stay ahead of the game. and I need to make sure that my code is always combined with at least a strategy on how to test the quality of it. I think that then you are really doing well, and then you should also not worry too much, because I think that there is definitely a place for you in the post-COVID world.
Thanks, Hugo. Yes, go ahead, Bani. You could add to that.
Yeah. Can I jump in a little bit, listening to what Sanjeewa said and also what Hugo said in terms of what businesses would want? I heard a lot of technical words, but let me try and translate that into human words. For example, you talked about need for speed, which means a lot of people have to learn to collaborate a lot better, because you talked about agile again, lots to do with collaboration. In other words, you working independently, individually is not going to get you very far. We talked about user interfaces, trying to deal with many different types of people and being able to cater to them. You need to have empathy. You need to be able to relate to a lot more. And how you get good empathy is if you have inclusion and diversity in your workforce. You talked about creating all of this, and if it is going to be a lot more remote working, that means the self-discipline, self-motivation, learning by yourself, all of those factors come in, which are, I just wanted to use more human terms, because at the end of the day, if we're going to look at skills for the developer, we do need to think of it as not necessarily only technical, but also as human beings. You do have to develop these different styles. Or if you don't have it already, these changes do need to come in if you are going to survive, grow, and kind of be sustained in the new world, in my opinion.
Sure.
I completely agree.
Sure. I'm just gonna on this note, there's a question from Chamila, who is also talking about some of the barriers, right? More or less countries are going to be more looking inwards now. There's this sense of nationalism. I think Sanjeewa touched it on this presentation as well. This means there's going to be a little bit more, challenges that are going to come across. So let me ask Sanjeewa to elaborate a little bit more on how, in terms of technology, can we overcome these challenges.
Yeah, I think this will be like an interesting dichotomy. Like, for example, the world was rapidly going towards globalization and open market, and moving towards the free flow of capital. I think that created like some sort of economies of scale, and people who can produce at large scale, who can uh, build things at economies of scale, were benefited out of it, and their price points were lower. So the other countries didn't produce things. So then they started buying from the people who build it at the large scale because of their economies of scale. So this sort of a nature happened at the global level on the production side. Now I think this will change. People will start producing things, goods and services within the country. That will happen. They will focus on the sustainability within a country. That of course will happen. But the digitally world will be more connected than it was before. So the digital aspect will be different, but the physical aspect will be different. That is the difference that we can see in this future world. So when it is digitally connected, there will be a lot of opportunities to outsource things, because ultimately for countries like Sri Lanka, because of the price point that we can produce the quality human quality work, because of that, people will tend to come to us, because for those services will be getting from us. That will not change, because digitally it will be connected. Digitally it will be connected than ever. But the other productions, let's say, whether it can be rice, whether it can be groceries, whether it can be local developer things that can be developed, will be developed within the country. So that is a very different situation than what it is right now.
Thanks, Sanjeewa. I think we've got quite a lot of questions coming in, and some of them mostly on skill. Since we're on skill, we're going to take more of these questions right now. But let me, I think, in terms of the experience, stop sharing my screen. and maybe read out some of the questions that we're going to talk about. So in terms of skill, I think Bani, a few viewers of us, Diane is asking some of the questions on in terms of skills. I'm going to be asking the same. Uh, we're talking about remote working, social distancing, isolations, things that we have not heard for a long time. Uh, what are the skills that are going to be critical from now on from an HR's point of view? Uh, in terms of, we used to talk, the age-old skills of communication and collaboration, and for a decade we have been talking about all this. Now it seems like it's changing into self-isolation and all these new terms and jargons that are coming in. How important is it for an organization, business? And in terms of a recruitment perspective, what are the new skills that you're going to look for when recruiting engineers?
Okay, so I actually think collaboration, communication, everything you mentioned still is much needed. Only thing is how you actually make it effective in collaboration, in communication might take a different turn, because you're going to have to use technology, you're going to have to use a different set of maybe applications and tools compared to before. So in that sense of, okay, if I just start from where we are right now and maybe before we get to post COVID, I think we are kind of going to go through an element of, right now we are all in isolation. We are all kind of, our introvertness, our paranoia is coming up a little bit more than intended. And I think it will take a little while to adjust back to when things become somewhat normal. But I think being able to adapt, that resilience of changing and focus becomes important. To talk about, to answer your question about the isolation, etc., I think a way I would describe it is each one of us sort of becomes a little bit of an island, but we have to be able to maneuver and manage on that island to be able to deal with the rest of the world. Example, if I am, for example, if it's a tech person, if it is creating, coming up with new ideas, etc., you will have to engage with others to brainstorm, come up with those ideas. Then you will need that space to be able to innovate, create, get your thinking going. Then you would need to be able to figure out how you demo these things, sell these things. So I think the same value, well, not value chain, but the whole chain of what needs to happen will continue, but self a lot more critical, because most of us in our offices, part of HR and part of management was to try and give that structure. It's a little bit harder to give that structure when everybody is somewhat isolated. So how we can encourage and empower people to be able to structure their own lives and be able to kind of, step up when need be able to deal with difficulties, mental awareness in terms of knowing how to deal with it when you do get moody, you will have more mood swings. So I feel that that is the area that you kind of need to uplift a little bit. So from an HR perspective, how we can actually help people be more self-aware, be able to manage. You can't switch people on and off. Sometimes we think we can, but we can't. So I feel people will have to be empowered to be able to know to ask for space when they need to take a break. I know, Hugo, I heard you say need for speed, but at the same time, if we don't help our people know when to switch off so that they're there for the longer haul, I think we're going to lose. So, helping people.
I'm going to pause you on that, Bani. I'm going to
Yeah.
pause you on that note, because
Okay.
since you mentioned Hugo, now it's I'm just going to ask Hugo this. In sourcing top talent, especially in a remote first culture, and Bani's talking about all these collaboration and all that stuff. What are the characteristics that's going to help developers now reach the next level, especially in a remote first culture?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, thanks for your comment, also, Bani. I also, of course, completely agree. It's not only work, and I think that also, yeah, trying to make people very much aware on how this balance between work and life should be, yeah, implemented, especially during these times, right? When everything flows together and people are working from home and the families everywhere basically, and work as well. I think that that's a really big challenge. So thanks for that comment. And also, I also want to make that nuance a little bit, because it's not like we want people to work 24/7. I think that's not good for anyone. And having people, yeah, having them healthy and happy is, of course, what we want to achieve in the end. Coming back to your question, Jonathan, I think that if you look at, yeah, particularly what type of skills that people should now be looking at, I think it is, yeah, I think it's really, like I said in the beginning, right? So I think that there are certain trends that they have to take into account. But I think it's also, yeah, it really depends, of course, on the type of organization that you're now might want to work for. I think that if you look at, for example, the client base of Gapstars, is we work for fast-growing tech scale-ups. Most of them are VC funded, basically meaning they have external venture capitalists backing them up. And that also means that they have a certain amount of money and a roadmap, and that they are going to burn through that money as fast as possible, and then get output also as fast as possible in order to dominate their respective markets, right? So that is the business dynamic that they're in. And I think that what you're going to see right now is that if you look at these type of businesses, the budget is going to be even more constrained, right? Because there's going to be less money in the market in order to pump these companies. But probably the demand for innovative and creative services is going to be even stronger, right? So you have less money and you want to do more with the money you have, basically. So I think that right now, yeah, the advantages for these type of companies is that remote developers are going to be a better option, right? Because, like we discussed earlier, on-site is no longer necessarily a benefit. So I think that if you look at the remote workers, they don't have to compete with on-site developers anymore. So that comes with a cost advantage for companies. So I do expect them to look more and more to offshore development places. So that, I think, is one thing. And then I think if you look at how developers should then act, so like I said, it's really a matter of having less money and more a critical time to market, which basically means that product and engineering are going to be converging even more, right? So you're going to see that product and engineering departments are going to be working together really closely in order to make sure that the margin when it comes to getting your software to the market, so your time to market, technical glitches, or even components that do not have a direct return on investment, they will be, yeah, basically on the lookout for these type of errors, and that they want to avoid this, right? So as a developer, my advice would be read up on the same knowledge as your product owner or product manager, and basically try to understand how and why certain features are prioritized, right? So Bani, once again, this is very technical. Maybe you also have some things to say on this. But for me, yeah, just to give you an example, like one of our clients, for example, they are going really, really far in installing these type of measures. I'm sure that most of the listeners are familiar with KPIs or OKRs, which are basically a set of values explaining like, hey, how good are you doing, right? So you can do this for sales, you can do this for marketing, but you can also do it for development. And I think right now there's already a new trend where they are also looking at developers installing OKRs on the components that are being built by these developers, attached to the revenue generated and or the costs saved by the components that they have built or that they are building, right? So these developers have now a direct impact on the value of the product and the profitability of the company. So I think if you look at this, like, companies are becoming much, much smarter. And I think that as developers, we are, of course, used to be very analytical and to work with numbers and to understand all these type of dynamics. So we have a big advantage there. But I think that, yeah, looking at the skill set needed for remote developers, which we are now, all of us, right? Doesn't matter where you are, is really to understand this dynamic, to be able to act in a business value first environment. And then to show to your peers, not only your colleague engineers, but also to your product owners, hey, I understand what I'm doing. Hey, I understand why I'm building this. And I understand what is going to be the part of this piece of software that is going to actually make money for the company, right? So I think that that's really where you can actually stand out now. And I think if you understand that, yeah, I think that there's like I said before, a bright future for people that have that mindset.
Thanks. There's lots of questions coming in. I think Anushka, Dindu, there's few questions coming in from them, interesting ones that we're going to take very shortly. If you do have questions, keep them coming as well. Just on the note that Hugo was speaking on about being business-centric now, business and thinking about developers more involved in the business. Where do you see, I'm going to ask a question from Sanjeewa. Will software developers and technologists be at the forefront of business leadership coming forward? I think past decade we saw others taking over the boardroom. There's very few people on business leadership. But now, given the scenarios and the dynamics, is that going to be? Are we going to see more people in business leadership from a technologist?
Yeah, I think for the business leadership, more and more technologists needs to be there to make decisions, because the technologist will pretty much create the requirement, right? Like, for example, why Steve Jobs become so successful, entrepreneur and also a businessman, and also is because he had the technology behind him. So when you are a technologist, if you know how to apply that technology to solve an actual problem that is out there in the world, that is where you will be successful. So whoever we are, but if we, as a technologist, if we can identify the actual business problem that is out there, such as someone is without, most of the time when we see a problem, we complain. But instead of complaining, if we come up with a digital solution, if we think different ways of digitally resolving the problem, then probably we will be a better people at a business leadership level in making decisions as technologists.
Thanks, Sanjeewa. I think Dinu is posing this question as well, right? He's just asking in terms of, we talked about, this leadership, technology becoming, software developers becoming, taking up leadership roles. Do we see that there is a gap right now? Because we for a decade maybe we thought we were ahead of technology, we were up there, we were doing e-commerce business, retail and everything, and suddenly the world goes on lockdown, and you find that there is these difficulties in getting what you need, and there's sure. So does that mean that we need more developers and involved in leadership?
Exactly. I just saw Dinu's question as well. So basically what his question is, like, these giants have failed in delivering fast enough in Sri Lanka, in even this online business. One thing that I see, one reason that I see is Sri Lanka was not prepared to go digital. This was a forceful thing. So even Keels or any other people, they were never thought that they will be have to operate like this big in the digital space. So that's the one reason that they were not reacting fast enough during this situation. The other one is probably pretty much I would say the lack of engagement with the Sri Lankan IT community, because Sri Lankan IT community is pretty much centric towards to serving the global market. Most of our IT graduates and IT employees are serving for global companies, but not for local companies. So that connection, the connection between the local companies and our IT industry was not there. So we couldn't, have people quickly coming up and resolving the problem in this type of situation. I think this is where something where even at a government level also can be influenced and connect this at a higher level. So probably in different forums we should raise this and bring this attention. So this is a good question.
Sure.
Can
I think,
can I
yeah,
start?
sure. Go ahead, Bani, please.
Sorry, the question about leadership and tech in more software developers or tech people in leadership. And you mentioned Steve Jobs. I think another way to look at that is technology will be in the forefront, and people who have tech skills and capability will be, with that competitive advantage. But I think where we need to focus on is tech becomes a hygiene factor. Everything I think Hugo and Sanjeewa was talking about becomes more critical, and without that I don't think you're going to survive. But to be able to be in leadership, and when you think of people like Steve Jobs, it's not necessarily his tech that got Apple to where it is. It's the ability to sell, the ability to empathize. It's all those other human qualities that sometimes, in my experience with technology people, we kind of shortchange it. We don't give it the prominence needed, and I think that's the secret ingredient to the future and the way that we are going, and to succeed in the future. For everything that you all have mentioned in terms of what we need to deliver and how we need to change, how we need to get there, it's incorporating those human qualities with technology. So this whole thing about education, it's not just STEM, it's STEAM, arts included in STEM, I think is actually the future.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Having said that, can I ask you a very frank question, Bani? Do you see people, more developers in the boardroom in the coming years?
I think they are needed, but they will be more effective if they do have the management skills also as much as the tech skills. And from my humble experience of working in Millennium IT, then LSEG for the past 8-9 years, I feel they underestimate those management qualities when it comes to actually delivering on business results. They kind of are consumed by the tech, and I think sometimes they underestimate the management qualities that are needed for success.
Sure. Thanks, Bani. On that same note, let me ask Hugo, from a business perspective, as you talk to CEOs, CTOs, entrepreneurs, do you expect them to, ask the developers to have a more, engaging role in decision making? Do you think that the CEOs want, or are they just looking for, a very, I would say, task-oriented role, and that's what they're expecting? What do CEOs expect from their developers and tech teams? What kind of a role that they want them to play?
I have to agree with Bani on this. I think that we would like to see more. I think also if you look at the strongest companies out there nowadays, usually they have a CEO/CTO co-founder, right? So there's one guy in the company that is one of the founding fathers and that actually knows the technology really, really well, right? So a lot of successful companies exist that way. When it comes to companies that are not necessarily technology driven but more commercially driven, I suspect that the gap between commercial guys in general and tech guys is quite big, right? So then it really depends on, hey, is there a chemistry within a certain person, of course, in that company that has actually really matches with what these guys making the sales plans, making the forecasts, what they look for, right? So I think that's really the question, especially when you look at like the companies that we work with. Some are founded by a technical co-founder, and then technology is really a big part of their strategy. Some others are also technology companies in very similar areas, but driven by commercial guys, and they usually don't have a very senior technical person who is making real decisions in the management, right? So then it's more on executing engineering department, basically, working on a roadmap decided by the commercial guys. So I think that, yeah, I think in general, it just really depends on the founding team. I believe that the strongest technology products that have come to market are usually founded by technical co-founders. And I think that if you look at each serious company, when it comes to their boardroom, if no CTO involved, then they should always have a CPO. Because I think that product is becoming more and more important. And usually when you have a good CPO, he should also wear a technical hat to a certain degree. So I think that's the answer. I think we cannot, I cannot give one answer, a yes or a no. I think it really depends on the company. From my perspective, what trend we will see there.
Thanks. Let me get this right now. Like, we're looking at a lot of talk on economic slowdown. We're going into a business look where business is going to look to operate efficiently, leaner software development practices. Sanjeewa, where is this going to take developers in the, is there going to be a crunch situation, or how developer practices are going to work? Do you want to talk a little bit more on that?
Sorry, Jonathan, I couldn't get the first part of it. So
Sure. So let me repeat. In terms of now, we're looking at more people talking more and more about economic slowdown. We're going to see where businesses are going to look to really operate efficiently, leaner software development practices. They want time to market. They talk about cost. What are the practices that developers will need to take into account now? And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very quickly covering, considering the time. Reusability is an important factor now. As some of our developers are so technically savvy that we tend to not to use the different components, maybe open source components, into our products. So as much as possible, there was a question even around it, how to make this software development faster. So I think the reusability is very important, using the components again and again. So we have to architect the product in a distributed way. Maybe microservices will be a better choice. Architect in a way that components are distributed, so that these different components can be reusable in the different architecture. And also, it is not about perfecting the solution, but it is about delivering it to the market. So that is the most important thing. So a couple of existing components to build a product would be sufficient to handle the situation. So we have to always be focused on whether am I solving the problem right now in the required time frame. So that is the most important question based. And also the CI can build.
I think you're frozen, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think there's something with the connection there. So very closely, I think we're coming to the end of this discussion. We'll take about 5 minutes just to close and wrap up. But one important thing that I wanted to talk about, I think we talked a lot about skills, we talked about practices, but at the end of the day, we're going to look at a lot of quality that's going to come out of this. What's the kind of quality, right? In terms of product and in terms of business, that's going to look at quality. The idea that used to be was that the developer owns the code, the QA owns the quality. How will these silos now come together? There are a lot of audiences in terms of developers. There are QA engineers. We have product owners. So different of these different roles. How do you see these roles and dynamics changing in the coming months?
Shall I?
Yes, sure. I think I'll just open it to the floor probably. Bani, please go ahead.
So if I pick up it from Millennium IT or any that I work for right now, this whole change of the silos becoming one integrated software developer that actually looks at the quality of their own code, understands the domain that you're operating in, and not just thinking of it as lines of code. All of that were things that we actually started talking about, I would say, about 2-3 years ago, especially in Sri Lanka. But like everything else with what we've been thinking of has been on the right track, but it almost sounds like we're saying we don't need specialists. I think we do need specialists, but we do need specialists who are empathetic and aware of the other or the full aspect of software development. It's not in isolation anymore, and the more you know, and linking it to what Hugo said, not only do you need to understand all of the code and who you're delivering it to, you have to understand the domain that it fits into. That's kind of the element I said about things like empathy, etc. Because at the end of the day, your code is going to be used by non-techie people who just need a service. So you do have to keep that in mind, I believe, at all times, in order to actually be able to give the best possible solution, product to all the different stakeholders that we are talking about.
Sanjeewa, any thoughts on that?
So very quickly covering again, I think the silos will be eliminated. That is imminent thing that we will face. We will, like, we had QA engineers, project managers, software developers, and different skill sets in previously. I think all of these skills will merge into one. We should expect more T-shaped individuals. When I meant T-shaped individual is they will have a core skill, whether they can be a developer or whether they can be operation guy. But they are, apart from their core skill, they will have to have another set of skills. Like, if you are operation engineer, you should be having the troubleshooting and identifying issues in the platform. That skill you should have. But again, also you should have a lot of skills in developing and automation. So similarly, developers will have a skill, should have the skills of quality engineering. And the quality engineers will definitely have the skill of different break, and even the security should be played at a different level, not like in the traditional way. The security folks are coming and fit the product, and the security should be everyone's focus, not a one team's focus. So all of these things will come into a one set of skills, I think, in future.
Thanks, Sanjeewa, for that. I'm just going to ask one more question from the audience that's coming from Harsha. I'm going to open this up for Bani and Hugo. As a developer, most of us are looking at constant lookout for tech skills, knowledge in current technologies, keeping up to date. What are the managerial skills that you want developers to now look at? Very, very, very. I mean, if you could pick 2 or 3 key skills, probably I'll start with Bani.
So I think as a manager, the primary focus of a manager is actually to get the best out of the team, which would mean being able to create the right environment for your team to do their best. In this world where we're going to be more remotely working, I think that is going to be a little bit more challenging, but still capable. Hence why the skills of a manager, I think, is going to be really imperative and a lot more critical in order to get the synergies and to be able to get the best out. And when it comes to management skills, it would be about being able to understand your team, being able to read that, people are not robots. So there will be times that they'll be at their A game. There will be times that they're not at their A game. How do you actually then help them get into their A game? Everybody working together means there are challenges because people are very different. The diversity aspects do create challenges, but if you can harness it right, you get the best out of it. And this is the area that I focus on right now at the London Stock Exchange, where diversity means we are better at empathizing at what our consumer would want, but also that brings out your best because you are allowed to be yourself. You're allowed to be, come up with all the different ideas, which is the diversity that we require to get this innovation and creativity that we all speak about.
Very quickly.
So I think,
sorry, go ahead.
and I think that, sorry, so just to finish that off, it's to say, I think the critical element there is the skills of a manager in all these teams, like project management, people who bring the agile teams together.
Hugo, very quickly.
Can I add to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. So I completely agree. I mean, in general, of course, the manager's job would always be to get the best out of his team. And I think that now, circling back to the topic of this webinar, I think COVID-19 is the perfect time also for people to stand up and to show leadership and to get their teams through this storm, basically. So I think at Gapstars, for example, what we do, we meet with all the team leads or team managers almost daily, at least 2 or 3 times per week. And we really share best practices on, hey, how are things going in the team? What is the sentiment right now? What can we do in order to boost morale? All these type of things are now basically coming in hand and becoming really relevant. So I think that's the things that you really need. I see also one question on this from Harsha. So yeah, I would like to go into that as well. I think one way is, of course, dealing with your team members and getting the best out of them. I think if you look at from a managerial perspective, that is really important. Second thing that I find really important when it comes to scaling the organization is to have people in these positions that understand that it works both ways, right? So if you can be a manager, get the best out of your people, and also understand where the opportunities lie when it comes to, for example, scaling the team or helping clients in a new or better way, and thereby also increasing revenue and those type of indicators, I think that's when you really stand out, right? So it's really about, 1, helping your people exceed, and then also 2, understanding your role within the organization and getting the organization also to the next level. And I think that's if you can have both of these areas, and at the same time as a developer also write some really decent code, I think then you're doing really well.
Thank you. I just want to leave each of y'all to probably give a closing comment on post-COVID this year. We're going to look at the next normal. We're looking at post-COVID. We still are unsure. Just want to leave you all with the last comments for the developer world in general. Maybe we'll start with Bani.
So I'm going to take a bit off of what Sanjeewa said about the future world looking slightly different, where there'll be physical boundaries, but digitally we'll be very much closer. And I think my hope would be that would actually mean sharing of ideas, innovation, all of that will be much better and everybody will have access to it. And because of the physical boundaries, almost every country, every geographic location will be able to actually try to put some of that into practice. So, you won't be in isolation because the ideas would be all over from everybody and the collaboration would be fabulous, which means everybody will get a chance to try it out because of some of the physical boundaries that we have, or we will have for a while.
Thanks. Sanjeewa, closing remarks?
I think this will be a really good opportunity for Sri Lankan developers to step up and take the responsibility, because there will be a lot of skills that world will be demanding from us. And if we rightly handle this situation and if we contribute really well, this will be something where we can drive the entire nation forward. So as developers, my humble request from all of you to all of you is let's identify problems and solve them digitally, and then contribute to the global economy as a country, and probably as a region. That's something I wanted to finally say.
Yes, Hugo, please.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
also would like to end on a positive note. I think, yeah, from my perspective, I can compare two ecosystems, the one in Amsterdam and the one in Colombo, when it comes to developers. I think that, yeah, the one in Colombo is super impressive. I think we have amazing people here. The level is really high, and every time we work together with the Netherlands, we see that we're definitely at the same level, and sometimes even better. So I think if we can really keep that up, like Sanjeewa said, like there's an enormous opportunity right now for Sri Lanka to gain that advantage and to show that yeah, basically they have a place in the world, and that place could also only become bigger from here. So yeah, I'm gonna work for that. I'm working for that every day. So let's yeah, let's work together on this. And thank you, Jonathan, for the effort and setting up this webinar. I really enjoyed it. I liked the discussion, and I hope also that the listeners take something away from this that helps them in these times of crisis.
Thank you. Let me thank Sanjeewa, Bani, Hugo. Thank you so much for joining on this, sharing your knowledge and experience, taking time off. Uh, Very interesting bringing up all these points. Thank all the attendees, participants for their questions and being engaged. We do really hope to bring more of these webinars in the coming weeks as we continuously kind of monitor these situations, trying to bring in a few new topics and to keep updated. So please do, post any questions or anything you could write to me on jonathan@gapstars.net, and definitely want to hear from you and what are the topics you want us to cover in the coming weeks. So thank you so much once again. Thanks, Sanjeewa, Bani, Hugo.